The Yellowstone landscape is large and diverse, and the population of bison that lives on the landscape has a variety of strategies for survival. Summer in Yellowstone National Park is paradise. The grass is tall, it grows rapidly, water's everywhere, life is easy, and they're among friends. The herds become large, and the animals run and jump, and they have no worries, really. But as the end of the summer comes to a close, the situation changes. The snows accumulate to 3 feet. Temperatures drop well below zero. It becomes very difficult for them to get around the landscape, and you see them in much more constrained space. Single file to get through the deep troughs to the next patch of habitat, and the older females in the group are trying to remember, what's the best strategy for survival, and oftentimes they just, build that trail all the way into the low elevations where they can escape that really harsh, cold climate of the high country of Yellowstone. Yellowstone bison create a great deal of controversy when they migrate to the low elevation winter ranges at the park boundary and want to migrate beyond into the state of Montana.
So we have this line in the sand, a literal line in the sand, where you have Yellowstone National Park on one side, where bison are respected and admired as a native wildlife species. I mean, iconic. People come from around the world to come celebrate this animal. Step right across that line and you enter Montana, where they're pretty much treated as vermin.
And the Montana Department of Livestock has a vested interest in protecting the economic interests of the livestock industry and cattle. So they manage through a variety of tactics. They call them hazing, which is chasing the bison off of their habitat with snowmobiles, on horseback, with helicopter, trying to push them back and keep them in the park. And then they also are authorized to just shoot them. The agents come out and just shoot them on their habitat. Or the third main way they manage is by capturing them in big corrals. They chase them into those pens, and then they load them onto livestock trailers and ship them to slaughterhouses.
Unspeakable things that now happen to wildlife in the name of brucellosis.
Brucellosis is a bacterial pathogen. It's transmitted primarily, we think, through abortion events, and it is only found around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem now for the United States. And the only remaining reservoir of infection is in bison and elk, and so there's a lot of intense focus around the Yellowstone system and controlling it so that we maintain cattle herds that continue to be free from brucellosis.
The Yellowstone National Park bison pose a tremendous threat to our livelihoods. And the reason is because they're so infected with brucellosis. And it only takes one. And that being that if they are on our property where we have our cattle and they have an abortive event and we have a transmission of brucellosis from wildlife to cattle, then we pay the price. The wildlife go on their merry way, and the livestock industry bears the brunt of the regulation and the cost. If there is an infection found, that herd is now put into quarantine. The quarantine means that you can't move any animals, so no marketing whatsoever, so that's a financial impact right off the bat. And then there's rigorous whole herd testing. Anything 6 months of age or older on your ranch has to be blood tested for brucellosis. There have to be, 2 to 3 whole herd tests done, and then there's usually an assurance test a year later. So the duration of quarantine is long, and that's a really long time to keep your animals confined, and it's a really long time to feed hay that's really expensive. That type of quarantine confinement has the potential to put you out of business. If the interagency bison management plan was not in place, we would not be here. I couldn't be part of what happens up at Stevens Creek when they have to test and slaughter those bison. I couldn't do that. But it's necessary.
I don't see anything from here.
Buffalo Field Campaign is a grassroots conservation organization that's dedicated to protecting the Yellowstone bison and their migration into Montana.
We come out on skis and snowshoes, and we're checking all the major migration corridors where we know bison move through. If we know of groups that are in Montana, we're checking on them, making sure they're okay. And if they're not okay, then we're ready to document any actions that are made against them.
Our primary goal is to allow the bison that access to winter habitat and let them be on the lands they need to be to survive. Every spring, our patrols document calves with broken legs or dislocated legs being run, 10 miles or more, and then we see those calves die a few days later. At a basic level, it's very inhumane. It's animal abuse when you look at what's happening on the ground. This is all supposedly carried out because of brucellosis, and yet wild buffalo have never transmitted brucellosis to livestock. Every year, thousands of elk are allowed to migrate from Yellowstone. Elk have been implicated in transmissions to cattle, whereas bison have never, but we're not treating the elk like we're treating the bison.
There's not many areas where we have this level of attention and focus on a wildlife disease. And so we've been working on it for over 20 years. And we have long time series across a vast area. So we're trying to understand the mechanisms that are allowing brucellosis to expand its range. And if we can understand that, can we use that to help us control it? So since the mid-2000s, we've seen that brucellosis is increasing in prevalence in elk in a widening geographic range. We do not have great tools to stem that tide. We do not have great tools to reduce prevalence. And the precedent is that we have historically built up good elk populations, and they have a strong hunting constituency. And so people want to maintain that. Whereas with bison, those hunting opportunities have only recently been in development. So historically, there's been a ton of media and management focus on bison. Bison leaving the park and then potentially exposing cattle outside the boundaries. That said, there's far more cattle operations that are at risk from elk transmission than bison. So then the question is, well, is it worth continually, manipulating bison to reduce prevalence from, say, 50% to 30% or 20%? And even if we did, then we're concerned about it still being an elk and then them getting reinfected. So then the question sort of leads to, is that enough benefit to warrant the costs, both the economic costs of doing it, but also the social and aesthetic costs of manipulating a wild bison herd that's primarily within Yellowstone National Park?
On a whole nother level, it's wrong because they do have a level of consciousness that we are not always ready to attribute to them. One of the things that we've seen in recent years with the hunt is buffalo mourning.
When a comrade is shot, they don't run away from the scene. They will go to that fallen comrade and they will try to pick him up. They'll use their horns, they'll nuzzle them, and they'll paw them some, and they do what they can to try to see if there's life and to try to get that life up. And a lot of times when they have realized that that buffalo is dead, sometimes they just bed down with them for a while and they'll just stay with them. You can't have a heart and not see that and not feel that. And yet most people don't see that because they don't take the time to spend with these animals. Even the people that are making all the decisions, why would they want to look into the eyes of a buffalo and see that there's another being back there with a soul as strong and deep as anything? They'd have to change their behavior. But it's so sad because we had millions and millions. Their estimates are 30 to 60 million bison in North America, just, shaking the earth as they roamed from place to place, blackening the landscape as far as the eye could see, as reports tell us from historical accounts.
That Yellowstone population is the only living link to those great herds of millions that once thundered across the plains. They've always been there. There's a thread connecting them back to those days. All the other herds in America have some level of cattle introgression in their genes. And the Yellowstone buffalo are pure buffalo. They don't seem to have any of those.
And now we have this one industry that insists on silencing that thunder that once sounded throughout this country.
This way of life maybe existed for 100 years, but what about the native peoples who lived here, for 100 centuries? Why doesn't their way of life count for anything? A lot of the different Native American nations coexisted with the bison, and their entire cultures were built around those animals. And when the railroads came across and penetrated the northern and southern prairies, that really had a big impact because buffalo could be shot and then the hides shipped back east. And there were some leaders in the West who encouraged the hunting and helped facilitate the eradication of the bison to get rid of the Native American people and to confine them to reservations and make them dependent upon the U.S. government by removing their source of sustenance.
That animal has sustained our Indian people for centuries. We depended on it and we moved with it. It took care of us through generations. And then to see it treated now the way the state of Montana wants to treat it is unacceptable. We don't manage any other animal across this country the way the state of Montana wants to see that Yellowstone buffalo managed.
I think they are afraid of people asking the question, why aren't there free-roaming bison on our public lands anymore outside of Yellowstone? We have deer, we have elk, coyotes, bears are allowed on public lands, but why aren't bison? And I think what's really at stake here is public lands grazing. We have all of these millions of acres of public lands throughout the West, and I think the livestock industry, who has tremendous subsidies to graze their cattle for profit on our public lands, fears that buffalo will come out and re-inhabit public lands and compete for grass. And I think that they are afraid to let the genie out of the bottle, so to speak, and they don't want the bison coming out of the park and opening up that can of worms for them. And so as long as they have this disease to tout, then that justifies and supports their policies. Profit is what they're trying to protect, and to do so they are killing off a a species, and they're taking away that species' right to exist on the habitat that it needs to survive.
Many bison advocates would prefer to see the National Park Service simply do nothing and watch the bison migrate beyond where we allow them to migrate now and pioneer into new areas. But the state of Montana isn't ready for such dispersal and colonization into new areas.
Yellowstone Park has too many bison, and they know that. If I had too many cattle, and I knew that, I couldn't just push them off onto my neighbor and say, it's okay, don't worry about it. And so, in terms of private property, business, and neighbors, Yellowstone Park cannot have too many bison for what it can hold, and then say, oh, what the heck, it can go off onto private land and it doesn't matter, because it does matter. Bison are huge, big animals, and they can be very destructive. There have been horses that have been gored, there are fences that are down, there are wheel lines that are destroyed. There's a lot of private property issue associated with bison above and beyond the disease issue.
The livestock industry just wants Yellowstone to be a tidy box or almost like a museum where buffalo exist. But what we've seen on the Horse Butte Peninsula, where part of the peninsula is Forest Service land and part of it is private, and there's a residential neighborhood out there, and the people who live there, 95% of them love the fact that there are buffalo coming through their streets and in their yards in the morning when they wake up.
Oh, it's just like living with anything else that comes out here. The biggest problems we have are the ones with the humans. We've had grizzlies, mountain lions come through, wolves, the buffalo, and we've had more damage done from people harassing the bison, like the helicopter scaring the horses and the horses go through the fences, or the bison run through fences because they're being chased by something. We've never had any damage done. They rub on the trees some, but they've never been too much of a problem for us. And these animals, they're not going to steal your children. I've never seen a buffalo steal the gas out of my vehicle. I've never had one start a fire. I mean, they're safer than Mother Nature with her lightning storms, or campers in the campground.
People who don't want buffalo in their yards can fence their properties. Ranchers who want to raise cattle on their private lands can fence those properties. And there are a lot of creative solutions to these issues that can easily be overcome.
One of the issues that you come up with bison outside the park in these winter, early spring months are even public health and safety.
It's difficult to deal with a group of 30 bison when you're traveling on the highway at 70 miles an hour. They're dark, they don't run fast, they don't get out of the way very quickly, so there's a high probability of car accidents.
As far as the highway infrastructure goes, there are solutions. There are wildlife corridors that can be implemented, safe passage like they did on the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Reservation, where you have overpasses for wildlife to cross and underpasses under the highway.
Safe passage for wildlife. It might cost a little bit, but it would save so many millions of dollars in insurance and highway fatalities. But that would enable large mammals to move across the landscape without impacting highways.
Another reason that they create social stresses to humans is that bison prefer sort of the flat valley bottom part of the terrain. And that's exactly where we have our agricultural areas. We put many of our cities in the flat part of the valley. And so humans and bison compete directly for habitat on the landscape.
Bison are not going to want to go hang out in downtown Bozeman, Montana. They're just not. And if there's concern for that, we make those areas less attractive and help create areas that are more attractive for them. So maybe we do some grasslands restoration in places where we do want buffalo to go, where it is okay, where there wouldn't be any conflict. That would steer them around Bozeman rather than through.
You know, if you take a drive through Montana, you know, you look at the landscape and it's not like every acre is full of houses or there are cows everywhere. You know, there's a lot of land that's available for bison.
Basically what it really comes down to is the human commitment to coexist. You know, all we've got to do is say, okay, yeah, we can do this. We can live together with these animals. You know, we're smart enough as a species to figure this out. We just have to want to. We have to make that commitment.
For me in this discussion, the common ground that all of us have is open space. And by all of us, I mean the conservationists, the livestock industry, agriculture in general, even the people that live in town. We want these vistas that we have grown to love and cherish in Montana. We want the wildlife pathways to exist through open space. And all of those things that everyone loves, open space is part of. The critical issue here is that if in their zeal to have bison on the landscape and not worry about brucellosis and not care about elk and the fact that they carry brucellosis, if we just concentrate on pro-wildlife and leave the livestock out of the equation, then what happens is livestock isn't viable anymore. I mean, we've worked really, really hard on this place and hearts and soul, and we would like to be able to hand it down to the next generation. But in the last 6 years, it's really taken a different picture for me, in that I don't know that we can do that anymore, because it doesn't seem fair to hand down all of the problems that are associated with trying to be a rancher. You know, you have no control. So there's a lot of things that you just have to learn to flow with. But diseased wildlife can't be one of them, nor can Yellowstone National Park bison, because it's so hard anyway. And then you put this on top of it and it becomes almost unbearable. And if ranching and agriculture disappear from the landscape, then you lose your open space. Because without that, then you're going to have development. You will have large tracts of land, maybe not subdivisions, but broken up. And if you lose your open space, what will the wildlife do? What brings the tourists here if all they see is development? And so then the big question becomes, how do we preserve ranching and agriculture and keep that open space to the benefit of all?
I think there is real incentive for us to work with those landowners to find a way to keep them on the ground, because I think it benefits not only them and their families, hopefully, but also us as wildlife managers, sportsmen, conservation interests, and wildlife advocates to have those open spaces, which in some cases are public lands, but in some cases are private lands. And so in that sense, we'd like to keep them as part of that complex of open lands. I think where I see us going right now with bison is to consider a model a little more similar to how we're managing elk, and that is managing bison over a larger landscape, using hunting to manage their numbers like we do with elk, using herders and or hunters situationally to maintain temporal and spatial separation between bison and livestock. It's going to be an incremental process of trial and error for us to get there, and I think it's only if we can take that approach where we can show some success that we can convince all the interests that this is a model that can work for bison as well as elk. I, in general, am optimistic that at some point we'll find a way that bison will be one of the wildlife species that we have in Montana, and that they'll be accepted as part of that landscape, and it will no longer be the really kind of bitter issue that it's become. I think we can get there, and I think eventually we will.
That'll be the big challenge for the next generation, is just how far can we go to restore wild bison on the landscape so that we can at least have a full complement of all of the native wildlife species that were here in the western United States before we domesticated most of the landscape.